think we're going to get started. We have some folks on Zoom, and I don't mean to be abrupt, but like, I think you're all here to drink, right? Yeah. So, welcome. I feel very privileged to meet with the Cask Club, and Luke's on the Cape has done a fantastic job with all our products. We're going to be talking or focusing on some of the whiskey things that I've been working on and trying to do with the company in addition to tasting through a bunch of stuff tonight. So if you have questions, definitely we'll wait till we're at the end of whatever the small section is. And the folks that are watching on Zoom, if you keep it on mute, and then we'll move into the question period, and then we'll try and answer that. I'll repeat the question so that everybody can kind of hear it. So let me just get started really quickly. My name is Randall Byrd. In the 90s, I worked and trained in Scotland. So, of course, we'll now have like helicopters and, you know, jackhammers and motorcycles. But if you can still hear me, I worked in the 90s training in Scotland for a title called a Master of Whiskey, which there's only a handful of us left. Kind of like a sommelier, but instead my focus is almost entirely on brown spirits. And in doing that training, I started in Scotch, but moved to other types of whiskey, Irish, Japanese. I've worked in Taiwan, I've worked in Canada, Kentucky, parts of the United States, as well as Ireland and Scotland. And I kind of got tired of it. The industry has a back story through distribution and production that was like getting a little bit aggravating to me, and I got fed up with it. I took a little bit of a break, and then I got approached by this company, Latitude Beverage, which does 90+ wine cellar. And so they had a great model. I took a look at it, and they asked me to kind of work with them on their spirits profiles and their programs that they were launching. They have a great team of people, including Terry Lozoff, who helps create some of the brands and some of the packaging, as well as helps taste and do that. I'm sure everyone here can volunteer to help us taste too. But we came out with a good lineup, and now we're here today, probably with about 1.5 years of serious spirits development under our belt. And I'd like to talk to you about some of the products that we have here today. I'm going to hold up the bottle to the screen, but I've marked a lot of the glasses that are on folks' table in front of you. So the very first one should say B for bourbon, and that is going to be the Wheel Horse Bourbon. That'll be our starting whiskey. I know better than to pass the bottle around. We marked how much is there, but you're going to have to deal with the samples in your glass. But basically, let me tell you a little bit about Wheel Horse. There's a bourbon and a rye, and the B is the bourbon, and of course the rye they are. Wheel Horse Bourbon and Rye are batch-built whiskeys. So in Latitude Beverage works closely with wine makers to put out their products. Sometimes we can reveal who those sources are. A lot of times we cannot, but we're happy or proud to have developed a kind of relationship and a contract back and forth partnership with Wheel Horse is our brand name, but the name of the distillery is Owensboro Distilling Company or Green River Distilling. Very old Kentucky distillery. They go back to the 1800s with their original DSP or distillation number is very low. It's also on the bottle. And one of the things I like to do is make sure that there's as much information as we can put on a bottle so that you can research, read it, or just when I forget stuff, I can look and see the mash bill or see, you know, different facts about the whiskey. So we developed a contract relationship or a partnership with Green River Distilling, as they're now trying to focus on their brands as well. And we would buy or source a bunch of bourbon and a bunch of rye, made in barrels, aged in that Kentucky warehouses down there in Owensboro, which is on the westernmost part of the Bourbon Trail. You definitely can visit, but it's a little bit off the beaten track. And well worth the trip because they make some fantastic whiskey out in western Kentucky or towards the western part of that state. And they were just a little bit north of where a lot of that tornado damage happened. So we've sent down as a company a bunch of water to help with the relief effort because we had the ability to send totes and material down to Kentucky. But we also partnered with Green River to also provide relief to that area and try and help out at least through this year and into the early part of next year. They have put this bourbon, which if you read the back of it, has a mash bill of 70% corn, 21% rye, and 9% malted barley, which is a fairly unique kind of mash bill. They lay it down, and then we go into the barrels that they have, especially after 2 years. And I sit down with a team of our people, and we taste the different barrels, and we combine them to make a batch. So this is a lot of whiskeys that you're going to purchase or that you're going to see out there. Hits 2 years one day, comes out the gate, they bottle everything that they have. They wait for the next 2 years and one day, and then keep moving it forward. In our case, especially because of supply chain issues and some glass supply issues that we had, our last batch that we made of both the bourbon and the rye had aged to over 3 years. So it was a kind of a happy accident because of the situation logistically, but we found that the flavor that we were getting was really, really good. And so we're now moving forward with product that is aged at least 3 years. Although on the bottles of the most recent batches, we have kept a minimum of 2 years because sending out labels and trying to do all that stuff was going to be problematic as well. So it is a minimum of 2 years, but actually it is 100% at least 3 years and older in the product. We like to non-chill filter. We like to do, obviously, add color. And we like to do this at a barrel strength of 101 proof or 50.5% alcohol by volume. And part of that is because we don't chill filter. It keeps your lipid and amino chains solubilized. One of the reasons that they do chill filtration is that if it chills, it can look off-putting because it looks kind of cloudy or snotty, or there's different terms. But flocculation, or where the fatty acid chains come out of suspension within the liquid, doesn't happen at above 46% alcohol by volume. And we like to have it as closer to cask strength that we can reasonably keep a higher proof at. So 101 on both the rye and the bourbon. The mash bill in this one is that 70-21, but there's a lot of malted barley, and that malted barley is expensive, but also adds a kick of flavor. And of course, you need at least 4 or 5% to kick off your saccharification. It converts the other starches to a usable sugar in the fermentation process. There's a lot of talk going on here. Let's get into some sampling. So if you pick up your sample, just please remember this is 50.5%. This is from batch 1. We have just won a Whiskey Advocate Award in about 2.5 months ago, rated at 91 points. And then last week, top 20 whiskeys of the world, we're at number 19. This on the shelf here, I believe, is at $34.99, about 35 bucks. But taste it, see if it's something that you enjoy. We can talk a little bit about it. Let me not put that in front of the camera. I'll put that over here for right now. So currently with this award and the accolades, the last batch that we had of the bourbon, which was batch 2, has been sold through. I think Luke's has managed to get some more stuff in. But as we approach the end of this year, it'll be gone. And people, once they saw the award, of course, order up, especially larger chains and multiple stores, try and grab as much as they can. But we're in the fortunate position that come January, a lot of our product reaches 3 more years. So we'll do a small batch of 3 years in January to kind of follow up with what we've gone through. And that will be batch 3 of the bourbon. So questions, comments? Is it awful?
No, relatively sweet.
So this Wheel Horse, a Wheel Horse is when we're trying to come up with a name and we're trying to figure out what it is. Wheel Horse is on a plow or a team of horses, is the one closest kind of to the wheel that is in control, or like a lead husky might pull the dog sled. The Wheel Horse is the go-to because it carries kind of the weight and directs the rest of the team. They like look to that horse for leadership, and the driver of the team also relies on that as their go-to. And that's what I kind of think of this. I want to have a go-to bourbon that's affordably priced. It changes with each batch. It'll be slight differences. The batch that you're tasting is probably 2.5 years and older, but the most current one, batch 2 and 3, will be older. And I think when you get that in, if you look at the bottle and it says batch 2, and you were to compare it to this, you'd see a slight difference. But that's the nature of batching. Instead of just doing what most distilleries will do, which is a very large number, and then hope that your 250 barrels even out the highs and lows between the different barrels to get a consistent flavor. We're going to try and get that consistency, but also keep ratcheting it up a notch to make it taste a little bit better, more depth and complexity. So I hope you enjoyed that. But this is batch 1, and we will now be creating batch 3 in January from samples that we get.
Is it batch 1 that was rated, or
batch 1? We're not 100% sure where the 91 points came in, because there's a lag time from when the magazine produces their ratings. But it was either batch 1 or batch 2 that got it. But the batch 2 is the one that got top whiskey of 2021. So they saw an improvement, and the batch 2 was the one that's a minimum of 3 years. Okay, so
batch 2 is in Luke's.
Okay, this particular is batch 4 of the Wheel Horse Rye, and one of the reasons this is a little bit ahead of the other ones is that you're using. We started a little bit earlier with rye, and we were doing smaller batches, and this is really what kind of launched the Wheel Horse brand, because we had problems initially sourcing enough bourbon, so they had to lay it down and get that. But when we went to this distillery, they happened to have a lot of rye. It wasn't hugely as popular as bourbon. So this is going about 4 or 5 years ago. This particular batch is the latest version, and it is a minimum of 3 years, and it's 95% rye, 5% malted barley. And that's fairly traditional. When we see some of the MGP mash bills for ryes, that seems to be a very popular kind of bandwidth of where people like to see their rye. Heavy on the rye, a little bit of the barley again to kick off the whole process. But our bourbon, that 21.9, is like kind of unusual within the industry. You can get some things that are somewhat close, but not always. All right, so let's take a little taste of this. I wanted to go with batch 3 when we had the supply chain issues allowing me to do a smaller batch, but higher quality, higher level. I was trying to go for something I called like a juicy rye. We were talking a little bit before about IPAs, but I found that a lot of ryes are very astringent or down the center of the tongue, and kind of a little bit of that drying quality. And I wanted something that was more mouth-watering, fuller flavor, really showcasing that rye deliciousness. And 3 and 4, I think, have delivered on that. As soon as that hits my palate, I get a little bit of that salivation, the delicious kind of flavor, and a little bit of that hint of menthol or mint. There's always, I always find that a little bit of that in rye, as well as that spice that's a predominant feature of the rye. So this one, I think, is on sale here, 28. But it's, again, I wanted to have a good go-to rye, just like a good go-to bourbon. It should be able to stand up in a mixed drink if you prefer to make cocktails. It shouldn't break the bank, and it should just deliver on flavor. And I think if you continue to taste with us through different batches, hopefully we'll keep upping the game and the ante as we go along.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a rye guy anyways, but you know.
Yeah.
You're right. It just have like a little more softness to it, you know.
Yeah, it's a lot smoother than a lot of ryes, which tend to be spicy and peppery.
Yeah.
Well, and they go for that big, almost like a harsh note. And I'm like, you can still have a lot of flavor, but without having that like kind of edging towards bitter, edging towards that like kind of.
And then that overpowers the more subtle stuff.
Correct.
Too much of that. So yeah, this is
And
very nice.
There's so many layers within the rye, and I think you're going to find that even with the bourbon, you'll see that as we move forward, because that's what we're going for, is that more complexity. When we do our first batch of either one, the rye or the bourbon, we're working with a limited, not fully aged product. So we're kind of like tied up a little bit with trying to get that complexity. But once we start to get the depth of the portfolio and we're aging stuff longer and longer, then we can start to get into that flavor. And by this batch, and in the newest batch of the bourbon, we had 4-year product that was put in lesser amounts, but also to give you that, draw out the complexity in the aging. So like I said, it's a blending and tasting and a nosing sensory experience instead of what I call Moneyball whiskey, where you like how many do we have? What's the dates? Just mix it by the statistics you're seeing on the page. We put a lot of time in sampling and making sure that it's kind of moving towards what we like to go.
What's the proof on the rye?
101 or that 50.5. Our Wheel Horse will always be at least that. Now, there's a Wheel Horse single barrel of bourbon that I've just put in toasted casks, but we don't drop the proof down on that. So that's hovering at about 115, but that's clearly slightly different label. It hasn't been released yet, but we took some of those 4 years single barrel bourbons, and that one will be at higher than the 101, at closer to 115. I have to see what it specs out at after we've taken it out of the toasted oak barrel, because that your evaporative loss, it changes. So it went in at about 115.7, but I don't know where it's going to land, but higher than 101.
It's interesting on the proof. I felt the heat on the rye much less than the bourbon.
Yes, and I think that if we were looking at a more the 2 or the 3 on the bourbon that's going to be released, I think you would find that it has also receded, because one of the comments that I'm like, my taste profile is to knock the heat down. I'd rather have complexity and subtlety while still not watering or diluting it to 40%. So, and I think you'll see in these picks that are higher proof, they don't taste like 60% or 121 or whatever we're talking about. And that's our philosophy on how we try and get to it. There are many people that, that's expensive also to put it at the higher proof, and the water will make it softer and cut it down. But if you work a little bit harder at it, or try and get your palate to the place where you're picking good stuff at the initial onset, then you can release things that are, instead of whatever catches can, if that makes sense.
I just want to confirm it's
27.
The 27.
Yeah. Fantastic price. And ryes have gotten this kind of in this stratospheric pricing. I mean, bourbons have too, so let's not pretend that it's only rye. But because we distribute, there's no real second layer that's adding 30-35%. And that, I think, makes the liquid more accessible price-wise, but also we deliver on flavor too. It's not like a budget tasting horrible product as well. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this, this has been spoken for, but this is our Hunt and Gather, and this is Hunt and Gather 2, which is a Canadian whiskey. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that Canadian whiskey, and this is the biggest, best kept secret in the category of whiskey. When they make a whiskey, they make 4 distinct columns of whiskey. They make a corn whiskey, they make a wheat whiskey, they make a separate rye whiskey, and they make a separate barley or malt whiskey. And then to make the Canadian blended, they take 4 separately aged those columns and blend them together. So they're taking a full barrel of this and using only half of it, or whatever their mixture is. But those whiskeys are not mash bills. They are fully that type of whiskey. So one of the questions that we got a lot about this is, well, what is this? Is this a blend? Is it a rye? I can't reveal the source of who makes this, although we put clues on the bottle, and you can probably figure it out if you just read a little bit. But corn whiskey, meaning it's going to be 95 to 96% corn with a small amount of malted barley, not because it's a mash bill, but because they use that to kick over that saccharification process so that you could ferment. And as a result, our first iteration of Hunt and Gather was a 15-year Kentucky bourbon, straight bourbon. And a lot of people were saying, well, are you trying to copy what that was? It was just we found something that was really good that we thought we could follow up on the heels of what was real knockout winner for our first launch of it. But at the same time, we were concerned because people were confused about the category and thought that this was trying to be a bourbon or thought it was going to be a rye. And the answer is it's neither. It's 15 years, that's legit. It was 15 years in a cask, but that cask doesn't have to be virgin oak. And it's not obviously not a product of the United States. So Crown Royal got in trouble a couple years back because they released a bourbon mash whiskey, and you can't even play around, which is basically saying it's their corn mash bill. But because they're not a product of the United States, they can't even play around with the term bourbon. They weren't saying it was bourbon, but it was misleading enough to people that they thought that I was it. So we don't want to get within 100 miles of saying bourbon, but there are more similarities between corn whiskeys in the United States and Canada than most people would acknowledge. One of the interesting things about this one is that it does not have a depth of that woody spice taste, especially from that 15-year gather that you got, that just rich, drying, like spiciness that you get on the sides of the tongue, because the cask is probably a used cask, not a virgin oak charred cask. Now, this is 120 or 21 proof, and it drinks super soft, very sweet. Some people who really like that kind of backbone of some of the whiskey with the virgin charred oak cask spice felt that this was too sweet, too soft. And so we started playing around with, like, if we have some of this product and put it into a cognac or a sherry or a port cask, will that give it a little bit more backbone? Will it expand the flavor? But plus, we really wanted to see, we bought a lot of this at a good price. I mean, it's not cheap or free, but I mean, compared to what you're talking about with bourbon prices, it was significant savings. And so the next thing that we have in front of you is this sherry cask finish of the 15-year-old Canadian. So 95, 96% corn, but now we've taken that and put it into a single sherry cask. And somebody was mentioning before that they had bought a bottle of the Copper and Cask. Copper and Cask is our single barrel brand. So this is not a single barrel, this is a batch. We took the batch and then aged it for a secondary finish, and it says on the bottle, Copper and Cask, cask finish, cognac finish. And I believe that there were two versions that we did of the cognac finish, which were first contact, because it was the first barrel that we had contact with and because the guy who named it is a big Star Trek nerd. That's really what happened. And then the second one was second to none, which was the second iteration in the cognac cask. And some stores got some of the one, and other stores in other parts of the country or wherever got some of the other. But we released that. And what you're tasting right here, the sherry cask finish 15-year hunt and gather, but we're calling it 15-year Canadian, will be bottled under the Copper and Cask label, but it's an Oloroso cask, and it's just yet another further experiment. This has not been removed from the barrel. The sample was pulled today and put into this small bottle, so you get to taste it. But come the new year, we will probably be releasing several of these cases if people are interested. I just wanted to show you stuff that we're working on. And some people, I think, have the experience with the cognac cask, but this is going to be different, right? So same foundation, but a little bit different.
Can I ask a question? Is everybody here in the Cask Club? Is there anybody that's not? Okay, great. So when this is released, we will share that with Joey, who is the marketing director, and give you guys first dibs on that. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So comments, questions, 120 proof. Yeah. So first blush in the Oloroso sherry cask, meaning that it was just probably 2.5, 3 months in there. And it's already showing to the point where I think that I'm going to remove this by the end of the year and start the bottle.
It's great.
Very forward for sherry.
Yes.
So corn, like you can tell it's high corn.
Well, and I think that that's unusual. Most people haven't had that sweet corn flavor kind of shine through, plus that the sherry richness.
The first sip seems
like too sweet to me, but the second was like I enjoyed it more. Than just that first.
Remember, I
It's
got a
different.
bottle.
So at the same time, we also laid down a Tawny Port, and it hasn't developed the same way. So we'll not, again, like I was saying before, it's not based on like, oh, we really need to sell some more stuff. We sold out of everything. We have to kind of wait till it gets to that sweet spot where the flavor of the port has changed it or showcasing enough. And I was saying before to somebody that it's a little bit funky right now. Like it gets into some kind of weird areas and you think like, is this really going to turn out? And then it pulls through and it showcases very well. So if you get the opportunity to come to the warehouse, and I think we'll talk about this at the end of the session, we'd be able to walk up to a barrel and open that barrel and then dip the whiskey thief in and pull a sample. And you can see stuff at all stages of development, including copper and cast samples of things that are there. So we've talked extensively about with Luke's and trying to make sure this can happen for folks, but we're going to do that probably in the beginning of next year. So if that's interesting to you, or you'd like to see behind the kind of curtain and see how we do stuff, but how a lot of people may do things and play, that's what that's set up for.
We're kind of an idea.
People enjoying that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it is what it is. And some folks, if you don't like sherry, it probably may not be helpful, but I think this was a real positive change, even from the cognac, which I really enjoyed the cognac finishes as well.
So did I. But you're right. We have a consensus this time to pull it.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, it's here. It's here. It is I'm going to probably say Monday or Tuesday of next week. It'll come out of this wood.
It's just about perfect balance right there.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of what I consider to be a fantastic pick, we had brought some samples of our copper and cask single barrel. So what we're seeing is our production brands with the Wheel Horse. Then we moved into like our hunt and gather, but like how we're trying to like showcase or give you different expressions of hunt and gather. And hunt and gather is moving, fingers crossed. We've sourced a 20-year Caribbean rum. And so the brand will move to hard to find, unique agings, and hopefully delicious variations, including a really aged Irish whiskey that we're locking down as well. So I wanted to say that it was 15 and 15, but the 15 was just a happy accident between the Canadian and the Kentucky bourbon. But the next one is moving to 20 and is not even in the whiskey category. We're going to explore some of the flavors of a richer, deeper rum kind of flavoring, and moving from there into some other things as well. So
Can you call it hunt and gather or something else?
nope, it'll be Hunt and Gather 3. And so, you know, our whole thing, if you look closely on the label, it says hidden in there, rare barrels and lost batches. So we know that this is kind of going to be a one and done thing. We hunt it out, we gather it, and then we have to move on to the next kind of thing. And so I like it because it's fun. You'll never know really what it is going to be, but we want to have it at a good price point and also bring something interesting to the table for flavor. And we'll see how that changes with this new rum offering as
Any
well.
idea when that'll be released?
Fingers crossed, March, April.
Just because I'm running low on my runs of confidence.
Yeah. I think, yeah, you know, you say this stuff, and I'm not trying to waffle or be evasive, but after a year of supply chain nightmares that literally postponed us being able to release Wheel Horse almost 8 months. I mean, I don't want to put it out there that this is something that's going to happen and then people are hanging on and waiting. However, that said, we're fairly far in the process. We have label approval. It's just a matter of changing the label to say rum, probably put a different color stripe on it. You know, there'll be some slight changes, but most of the heavy work and approval process has been completed. So once we can land it, which is the shipping is a whole nother animal, I can get this into the bottle fairly quickly once it hits.
At least it's not coming from China.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, look for it in spring. We'll try and keep Stephanie and the store updated as far as when that's coming. And of course, you know, the Cask Club does such fun stuff that we want to make sure that you're involved in that. And I think that the event that we're talking about where you might come to the warehouse may happen in January, February, or something like that. And then we may even have more information at that point about some of these products.
That would be great.
Yeah. But I like to give people, like, so much of the fun that I had in the late 90s was like just exploring behind the scenes, you know, why is this done this way? What's happening? Like, can you taste the difference between these two barrels? And the way that it was taught to me was through an apprenticeship. So I would be like, they'd be like, open the barrels, try both of them side by side, and you tell us what you're finding. And so I try and bring that kind of sensibility to what we're going to hopefully do and what we try and bring out with our products. It doesn't matter what I like. I'm just going to try and bring out different things. And if people decide that this is something they really enjoy, then they can pick it or they can work with us on it.
Maybe you could do a pre-release tasting.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely possible.
I had
Because-
the good fortune to be at Jack Daniels like a few weeks before they released Gentleman Jack.
Yep.
But for us Tennessee Squires, they provided us with the tastings of that. It was like, that was kind of cool just being there at the time, you know?
Yeah, definitely. We'll see what we can do with that. This is a pre-release. This doesn't, you know, and
All right,
you've
that's what I
seen exactly what we're doing. On our more traditional single barrel program, the Copper and Cask was designed because we were going to source whiskey from all sorts of distilleries all over the United States or the world, and then offer those single barrel casks to stores, chains, clubs, even a whiskey club. And one of the things that Terry Lozoff, who worked really exceptionally hard on the label, which big kudos. I think this is a fantastic label. But one of the things that we're very concerned about is as much information as possible about what's in the product. So you can, like, I used to nerd out when I was a kid reading cereal boxes, and I just like to read stuff while I'm eating or drinking. And so based on independent bottling of Scottish whiskeys, which would say the distillery, the age, the finish, where the location was, all these things, we developed a label that will allow us to transfer a lot of that information. Now we're looking at the store pick, and Luke's really did pick a winner here. And the barrel number is MK140. Okay, I'll explain the code in just a second. But it is a single barrel selection. And if it has a bluish black label like this, it's a bourbon. So there's 2 mash bills that we will have from MGP, which is currently what we have the most stock from. This will be expanding to Kentucky and Tennessee whiskeys later. But for right now, our first iteration this year, this summer, started with MGP juice or liquid. There's a 70% corn, 21% rye mash bill. That's what this is. And there's also a 36%, 4% rye mash bill, which is what this is. They both have the same dark black blue label. Okay. There's a red label, a reddish label that you saw on the cognac finish. And that's reserved for special finishes and also for our wheated bourbon, which is very, very hard to source right now. So we're probably not going to see that for a little while as a wheated bourbon. And then a green label, which is our rye expressions. So even though they'll look similar, we didn't want to have it look like a giant rainbow on the shelf. So they're darker shades of burgundy, dark green, like almost like a forest green color. And I think they look fantastic, but we try to give as much information about what's inside the bottle each time. Yeah.
2 questions. One, that first one, I think that's the same blend as on the Wheel Horse you were talking
Yes.
about. So my question is that a particularly reliable blend in terms of the kind of flavor profile you want? And then the second question is the corn and the barley and stuff sourced in the same parts of the country? Because obviously, based on the terroir, you'll have
Yeah,
different
the distilleries are probably 60 miles apart from each other. MGP, which is in Lawrenceburg, Southern Indiana, and Owensboro which is in Kentucky, but you know, on the other side of the border, are not that far apart. But there were, when they were creating their recipes, and Greg Metz was working at MGP, I'm sure that there were discussions in helping set up and bring back this distillery. Owensboro and Green River Distillery, they're the same distillery. Back in the 60s, made Old Medley. But they kind of were mothballed, and when they came back out, they were trying to do a lot of work to redo this without the chain of knowledge from the old distillers that were making some very famous stuff. And so they had to kind of reboot the system. And I think that there's a lot of discussions with people who are making fantastic bourbon, and that mash bill was one they settled on. It's not the only mash bill they make. It's the one that we were able to buy a lot of from MGP. And by coincidence, we also found it at the Green River Distillery for our Wheel Horse. I really like it a lot. So when I saw the mash bill available at MGP, we requested purchasing a lot of that. Now the code on it is MGP, K, Kentucky. So this is aged in Kentucky, even though it was distilled in Indiana, which is kind of odd, but it was cool. And I'm working on a thing I call ghost ricking, which is moving stuff from, let's say, a Tennessee whiskey to be aged in Kentucky, or in a Kentucky whiskey to be aged to a different location in Kentucky to get different variations on the aging than you would normally get if it was kept only at that distillery. And so
is it like just the climate, or
it can be different. So if you look at the MGP barrels, and you could see this at our warehouse, pretty clean. I mean, all barrels are a little bit dirty, right? Because they've just been sitting for 5-6 years or whatever it is. But the ones that were in the Kentucky rick houses that have a corrugated and almost more exposure to the air are like filthy.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're getting a bigger temperature swing than the concrete warehouses that MGP has in Indiana. So there's going to be variations on how it adds to the flavor. But I think what's also fun is that when a lot of people, like when you're selling this in their store and you're talking to people, you can say, well, this was Kentucky aged. And people are like, it doesn't, well, it's from Indiana, but it's Kentucky aged. And I think that people like to get that little bit of extra information, or find that story, or like have that little mystery of where was it? How did this, you know? So I like to mix it up a little bit, not to be hiding things, but to give you something else to like, does this have a difference between the MGP Indiana juice and the MGP Kentucky liquid? So you can play and taste and see. Now, honestly, I can't tell a huge difference. I can look at the barrel and see a difference, but taste wise, you get really good barrels from both, and you sometimes get a little bit off barrels from both. So, but it's fun. It's fun to like be able to talk about it, I think.
Well, the precedent has been set. Harley Davidsons are made in America, but 40% of the parts are from Japan.
Right. Well, so what a lot of people know is that I snuck onto the Stitzel-Weller distillery property during the Super Bowl, I think in 2009. And the guards were distracted. We had a guy that worked with Jefferson's, but also knew another person who had stored stuff from when Old Fitzgerald shut down in '96. And he had a health issue, so he was selling his whiskey. So I was able to get into this warehouse and walk around. And what I noticed is that like there's tons of competitive brands on this Diageo-owned Stitzel-Weller property. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't we take our MGP Indiana juice and store it at Stitzel-Weller, like the legendary Happy distillery next to his house, right? And I thought, well, that's like kind of an interesting story. Would it do anything? I don't know, but let's find out. And if people are paying for storage, which is relatively short money, say it's about $1 per month to store a barrel in a rick house, they're interested in filling their warehouses now at a point where everything that they're selling is going out to get revenue, and to also, it kind of changes the climate or the temperature because your liquid mass changes what the overall how fast the temperature swings in the warehouses and things like that. So it's part of what the industry does. I think that once I start saying, oh, we age this, it's a Weller, Diageo will shut that little project down. But until they figure out what I'm doing, I think I got 2 years before they realize up to what's going on. So that's kind of like what the thought was. We bought some Kentucky aged MGP juice and liquid. And this is one of the expressions. So that's the 140. Did you have a sample of that? I should take that one at all. I did, but I think somebody came in and was asking about this.
Oh, should I, you know what, I can grab one of the.
Yeah, whatever works.
I'll do that.
Okay, so let's talk statistics here. 57.3, that's 114.6. As always, it doesn't taste like a huge alcohol bomb.
And we showed how many selections to Luke's that they picked up, was it 6?
Yeah, I probably rolled in 8, but yeah.
Maybe 8.
Yeah.
So out of 8 selections, Luke's team chose this barrel.
And they did a fantastic job. Well, you decide if they did a good job, but I think they did. And they were able to choose between some rye, some the high rye bourbon. This it's not really low rye, but the 21% rye bourbon, 95% rye. We had another one that we released for a latitude pick called Melted Eye. I don't know if you've seen that on the shelf, but that was a rye that was 49% malted barley and 51% rye, so technically a rye, but like the flavor on it was crazy. And so they saw some of those barrels as well. And they went for what I think was just something that a lot of people would really enjoy. And the price on this is on sale at a ridiculous, like I can't, it's at $43 or something like that. What's your barrel?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I want to say it's under 45, and that's like crazy for 114 proof. So thumbs up, thumbs down, people.
Very
One of
good.
my favorites.
Yeah.
This is one nice power now. This is the one.
Yeah, yeah, so I'm getting 2 bottles, so.
Now
Just in
what's
case.
interesting is when this is done, of course, this is it. This is a singular moment in time and liquid and all this other BS that sounds very philosophical. But what's really cool is I look forward to what the next thing is. But if you're really loving this and you want to get more of it, you have to buy it while it's being sold. So a lot of people come back a year later.
It's $42.99.
$42.99, $43, yeah. And we keep 1 bottle in the archive at the warehouse, but we've already had people trying to buy sold out stuff come back in.
Okay,
But
I have
the-
the library and I'll just pass my phone around so you guys can see it.
But I locked this cabinet because it's like really cool to have it, but I keep a sample so I can compare, and if you come back and were to taste,
So that's the library, all the coloring gas.
Oh, that's
I was gonna come around.
I'll take it.
and you can see slightly different colors in the labels. I don't know if you
That's
saw
really
that.
cool, yeah.
Okay,
That's really.
so now when we're playing with stuff and we do special different experiments, right? We can sometimes come up with that melted eye, which is that 49%, which we only got a few barrels, or if we had the toasted oak finish of the Wheel Horse single barrel, right? We can play with the different things that we're doing, but every once in a while we get an anomaly barrel. And the very last one is one called Blackheart. Has a little heart on your glass. I'm not trying to be coy. It's not a Valentine's thing. But Blackheart is no color added. This is a 36% 6-year Kentucky aged bourbon. So you could say it's like a brother or sister barrel of this one. However, the mash bill is a higher proof strength. It's a little bit older, but it comes out with a very dark coloration because as the cask was leaking, it was at a distillery in Kentucky and they were able to grab another cask to put it in. The second cask was also a virgin charred oak cask that they were going to put their own product in. So you got double oak, but double charred oak, which is unusual. And if people know Scottish whiskey, I had a favorite one. My brother-in-law loved Loch Dew, which was this black whiskey, but they got into trouble for adding color and this and that. I was going to name this Black Don't, but it's too inside of a joke. So I named it Blackheart. There is no color added. This is naturally what happened. There were only 13 cases, and Stephanie has ordered the one case that I released from the last few to be available through.
So we have 5 bottles available. If anybody's interested, it needs to be purchased tonight, and then we will send it up once we have all the commitment. But it will not be on the shelf. It's just if you want a bottle, you are privy to that, and then that'll be that. So there's
So
5 bottles available.
it'll look like this. The color shows darker in the full bottle because as it gets down, it's a little bit hard to see that. But 60.5% 6 year, so 120 proof. So a little bit of a sip of this. And the joke is that's Diet Coke. That's Yep.
Here's the thing, I just found out that we actually do have the hunt and gather. So if anybody wants hunt and gather,
Oh, I thought that was just for,
we actually
Okay.
do have more, actually,
Great.
we do, somewhere else. So if anybody wants that, just let me know, and then we'll get it here, and just wait for tonight, and I'll let you know what comes in.
Yeah.
So what's your name?
Just.
Number 2, right? Yes, yes.
oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting? It's got a nice sweetness for a 36% rye,
So oaky and smooth.
but that vanilla is just like come out from that double char that's like kind of made it. So, but that's like an anomaly. It's a one-off. For clubs, for people who are aficionados, this is how this gets released. Easily, you know, there are stores that would want to buy everything that we had of this and just, you know, release them. But I don't think that's any fun. You want to get, you know, some stuff out to people that they can enjoy instead of it all disappearing into some collection.
So is it the extra oak that softens the proof? Because again, this one is even softer than the lower proof.
Right. Well, I don't know if I would categorize it that. When you do an intense char, the vanillin or the vanilla kind of quality that's a taste congener breaks up in wood. So it happens at a slightly lower toasting temperature than bourbons typically specify, which require a char. But the char takes this like wood congener and breaks it into molecular elements that give it that vanilla taste. To me, the way I smell and taste this whiskey is this is like a vanilla pillow, and the alcohol just slides on top of that. And it's so I know the proof strength is there. I mean, I tested each of these things and made sure it was there, but like you get fooled because the almost like alcohol sting or spice, 6 years. When you get aged alcohol, it moves from the tip of the tongue young, spikes, flavor, tingle, to a warming on the back of the palate, which this I think is doing, but it's masked instead by the vanilla softness of the whole round experience of it. That's my unscientific explanation, but like I think that's what I've seen in Scotch whiskeys that are very aged. You just get a nice warmth on the back of the palate, but that brand new whiskey or new make or moonshine is always right on the tip of the tongue, and it disappears very quickly. This kind of still has some hang time going on as I
Vanilla finish is amazing.
Finish is
Yeah.
so long.
Lasts.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's
So-
very, slightly reminiscent of Maker's 46. where they just
Yeah.
put some staves in there for a few weeks.
And they'll do that by the staves are at different toast levels, and they're using the wood to kind of bring out whatever. So if you had done a focus on that mocha or that vanilla kind of forward, yeah, I could see how you could get close to this. Yeah, a big respect for the Maker's product, but we don't add anything in. It's just that was one of those happy accidents of what happened. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephanie, how much?
For the
Blackheart.
Blackheart is $61.99, correct, Joey?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's in on Blackheart?
Absolutely.
All six of us want 5 bottles.
Oh, we're
Now,
one.
how
Oh, you're
about
one?
Yeah, we'll run down.
hunt and gather?
That's fine.
Hunt and gather?
Let's hunt and gather. Do you know how many you have?
We have 2 cases.
You have 2 cases. So this is available if anybody wants hunt and gather. So
all
Joey will
I'll
take
let you
your
know
name.
When we get it in, just let them know, paper up there and everything.
Okay.
And now, who's gonna be interested in the sherry when it comes in?
Absolutely.
We can't take we're not taking pre-orders of the show.
No, that hasn't been bottled yet, but
No.
We're not there yet.
But
I'll let you guys.
make sure that you get the lion's share of what we
Yes, we
can
will obviously
allocate.
release it. As soon as it's available, we will let you guys know on that for sure.
Do you know when you're gonna do like, tours of your distillery?
Well, that's what I think we're gonna talk about now. I
Yeah.
mean, we had,
So we initially were gonna do a raffle sort of thing that if you were here, whatever, but we just decided before you guys arrived that we were just gonna invite all of you. And we are going to pick a date, and the date kind of, it will be non-negotiable, so hopefully you guys can make, but we'll give you plenty of time. And it won't be until probably like early February.
at least, I'm
Yeah.
traveling extensively in January,
Yeah.
so.
So sometime in February when there's nothing to do on Cape Cod, right?
Exactly.
And then,
Except drink bourbon.
right, so we'll give you plenty of notice and we'll take it from there. And, you know, you guys all seem to be friends here. If you guys want to like do a car service together, if you want it, because we're going,
Sure, come pick me up.
it's in
Yeah.
Rumford, Rhode Island, which is about like an hour and 20 minutes from here.
Pawtucket is probably the easier town than most
Yeah.
people know.
No, no, I don't. I
Right
still
next
do
to
Pawtucket. So we would love to have you all there. You'll be able to sample all kinds of fun things and check out more than just what some of the pictures I showed you, but be pretty exciting to pull samples out of the casks and whatnot. But again, we will give you plenty of notice. So that's exciting, right? That'll be
Yes,
fun.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
So are you thinking in the evening or like Saturday afternoon? I don't know if that helps, but try and figure out a time that most people could come. And the one thing that I have to caution about is that like, we'll get in, but I don't, even when I work professionally and have to sample tons of samples, I do small pours, tiny tastes. And that's what's going to happen at the warehouse. So if everyone feels this is going to be just a drunk fest of high proof stuff,
No, because then we have to
probably
drive
not.
We
back.
don't enjoy
Right.
it, but yeah.
We
well,
have to
no,
drive
and I
back.
don't, right, and I don't
I'm
want to
staying
create
over,
a
but I
situation.
wanna enjoy
I want to
myself.
have the maximum experience, but to
Yeah.
manage expectations, it's going to mean that we'll play, but it will be
Yeah.
in small amounts and reasonably.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe like a Saturday afternoon, like an early afternoon, like noon or
Yeah,
one.
that would probably make sense.
You know,
in
and
February
maybe
February.
for
do a
one,
little lunch
because I
after
have-
or something like that.
That would
do
make
a
sense. in
radio
February.
broadcast, so
Let's
at 1:00.
But again, we'll give you plenty of notice, so there's no soccer
Yeah.
games or any of that.
You guys figure it out.
The Blackheart is $62.99, so anybody want
What
to?
did I say, 61?
One more dollar?
No.
Deal breaker.
I don't know, man.
So-
When's that date switch, Joey?
We have toasted cask. I just brought some barrels up to Vermont and we're aging some maple syrup. At which point those barrels will do as a finish. I'm doing some barrel aged roasted coffee in a couple of our barrels. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, but this is a little bit probably more going to happen at the store level, but as Cask Club influencers, you might be able to sway some of this, is a project I call the Legacy Project. So let's say you have this fantastic barrel, the MK140, and your next pick in June or April is going to be a rye. If we have advance notice, we could take your MK140 barrel and finish the rye in the one that was a winner previously
Wow.
and then bottle it.
That's a great idea.
Or if you have a Blanton's or an Eagle Rare barrel that's fresh, we can take that and do different projects or experimental bottling. Because what we have in Rumford is called a rectifying license, which means we're allowed to play with the flavor and bottling and proofing of alcohol. So it's a little bit different than a distillery, but if you had, for example, a pretty cool store pick barrel and you wanted to try and put one of the new picks into it to age, This is what I'm calling the legacy project. I've never seen anybody do this, but you could take your, for instance, Blanton's or Eagle Rare Barrel and then finish another bourbon. Or if this, we
Yeah, I
sent a
think
lot of
that-
these out to the stores, but if the store has this and it kind of dries out to the point where we can't rejuvenate the barrel, it might not work. But if we keep them in-house, we can keep them humidity and temperature controlled so that we can use it later. So as we move into the next phase of this project of copper and cask, I'm encouraging stores to leave the barrel at our facility so that you have more options on how you're playing as you move forward. That make sense?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming in and drinking all the whiskey. Yeah, let's ask some questions of the Zoom folks who've been on mute this whole
I
time,
don't know how to do that.
or they fell asleep.
I don't know how to do that.
They
I'm
drank too
still
much of the
there.
bottle.
No, that's not it.
Hey, I didn't fall asleep.
Get some bottles right behind you.
Oh,
You won that. You won the,
Oh, cool.
the barrel.
Oh, who's the guy that just said he wasn't winning anything?
Oh, we won
Great, thank you very much.
them? Oh, it's only Todd. So
Okay. Todd, do you have
I'm
a
not only
question
Todd.
for-
Sorry, Todd.
That's all right,
He's gonna
Stephanie.
send me a message.
I'll take that to heart.
Thank you.
Oh, cool, yeah, no problem.
I don't have any
Folks,
questions.
I can't necessarily hear. Can you hang on just a second? We'll see if there's a question from.
I think that there is, and I can, it's probably me just turn the
Hear me?
volume. Yep, now.
Yes.
Yep, sorry, my volume was down.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
No,
Yes.
I don't. I don't have any real questions. Other than I just want to, for people who don't know me, I actually run the Luke's Chain, and I just want to thank everybody for attending. I've known Randall from his previous life, so it's good to see him again. And I like that legacy product. Randall, I will be reaching out. We will have a barrel from a certain distillery that we should be receiving in like mid or early spring.
The
So
faster the turnaround time, the better or easier it is to do.
yeah,
Even then, if they've held it and it's been in weird conditions, I can't promise anything, but I think we can make it work.
yeah. So I try to reuse all my barrels. We give them to, a couple of breweries around us, gets them, and we brew some porters and stuff in them too. So I like to try to reuse them.
Right, and if you do get those porters or those beers that have been aged, or you use it, like let's say you sent your MK 140 barrel to a brewery, they've now bottled their beer, right? And you can get the barrel back. We can do a beer barrel aged ex bourbon or whatever it was, and then do it as a finish onto some other project as well.
No, that's
Much
good to know.
easier with the low alcohol, high water content beer, because it swells the barrel.
Right.
So yeah, just keep those things in mind. If you had somebody that was doing, like, I found a coffee roaster, as you probably heard earlier, but if you knew somebody locally that was doing some fun stuff and you wanted to try something a little bit wackadoodle, it doesn't mean that we have to commit a full barrel into it. We could try it with a finish for 6 cases or something like that, and then bottle that for you as well.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
Todd, it might be fun to partner with Cape Cod beer or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
maybe do
We
something-
we actually have Cape Cod beer in stock right now, Antique Stout, and we actually have 2 labels from Barnstable Brewing in stock. So
Nice. And they're usually pretty good about, if you loan it out, they'll return it. So I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
that's part of my deal. I want my
Good.
barrel back. So
Yeah. Well, very nice. And we'll try and set up whatever the on-site at the warehouse meeting in when we have a little bit more information coming back in the new year. But I know we're in the holiday season, so the pricing's fantastic. I think everyone really liked a lot of the stuff they tasted. So thank you for the opportunity.
yeah, that the copper and cask is on sale through the 26th, and then it returns to normal price. It's on sale because I knew you were coming, Randall. So from me to you.
Well, thank you. Make me look good if you buy it, but yes. But it's a winner. It really is delicious. I was just tasting it again here, so nice work.
Good, so if I get a gift certificate for Christmas, I'll have one day after Christmas.
That's right. If you do get a gift certificate for Christmas, you have
Right.
1 day to cash that in. You better.
Talk to your wife.
Well, thank you again. If there are no more questions, I think we're gonna kind of wrap up, but I wanted to give a chance to have that question, but also to say thank you to everybody for participating. Good points, great questions. So thank you.
Thank you all for attending.
Thanks so much, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.